Welcome to the May 2023 Star Wars Canon Update. Last month we got 2 new series, a book, a manga, and 18 new comic issues, so let's dive in. Ironically, I'm gonna start with the non-canon story, Star Wars Visions Volume 2. Obviously, they don't add anything new to the canon universe, but I personally loved the second collection of shorts even more than the first volume. They're not canon, but I wanted to make sure to give them a shout out. If you haven't already, give 1 or 2 of them a try. Screecher's Reach was my favorite of the bunch, but I enjoyed them all. The Young Jedi Adventures premiered on May 4th, and that series is canon, following several kids in the High Republic era. It's a show made for children, but I thought it was very charming and watched all 7 episodes. Despite being for a young audience, there were still some fun, nerdy inclusions like the first on-screen appearance of Jedi Vector starships. Sticking with the High Republic, Path of Vengeance is the final book of Phase 2 of the publishing initiative. It finally took us to Planet X, the homeworld of the Nameless Creatures, or Shriekeray. We got some answers about their origins, but several more questions were raised as well. Phase 2 isn't quite over, there are still several comic issues on the way, but Path of Vengeance was a fun read that satisfied my curiosity while also keeping me intrigued and hyped for the start of the third and final phase later this year. Edge of Balance Precedent is the Phase 2 manga, and it was my favorite of the 3 volumes that have been released so far. Each new release has me more and more invested in this story. Precedent tied in with Path of Vengeance very well and answered some questions established at the end of Volume 2, where we saw the Nihil searching for something in the wreckage of a Jedi temple. It turns out to be a droid and a journal from a Jedi that witnessed the Shriekeray and may have had some clues about them. The fact that half of this story took place during Phase 1 was very cool and unexpected and has me feeling hyped for Phase 3. The High Republic issues 9 and 10 were unfortunately spoiled a bit by Path of Vengeance, but they were still pretty rad. Tay and Vildar have to resort to using a dark side artifact to combat the Leveler and the Herald of the Path, and the art surrounding those moments was awesome. And honestly, reading and seeing the story in comic form was a completely different and emotional experience. Vildar and Tay's story was especially good. All in all, I think this comic series has been consistently one of my favorite parts of Phase 2. Nameless Terror Issue 3 kept up its intensity for an all-ages comic. The Jedi form a plan to kill the nameless creature stalking them throughout a crashed ship, but they have no idea they're also surrounded by several nameless eggs that are about to hatch, and they've got a shifty disciple of the path to worry about. And we're seeing that the Nameless are pretty smart hunters, outwitting one of the Jedi and his plan to lure it away. The more we learn about them, the more terrifying they are. Nameless Terror Issue 4 was even more intense and sad, with some really great impactful art of Jedi Master Sula making her stand against the Shriekeray. The image of her losing her arm to petrification was chilling on its own, and then she held the rest of the hatched eggs at bay while everyone else escaped after setting off the ship's self-destruct sequence. I was shocked an all-ages comic got so dark, and then we learned that Tyoric is part of Sula's Jedi lineage, which is pretty neat, and explains how she knows anything at all about the Nameless. The High Republic Adventures Issue 4 was probably my favorite so far because I now see how it's tying into the rest of Phase 2. Maz's pirate crew heads to Jeddah to stop their enemies from taking part in the battle, and Sav starts to find kinship in another Force-sensitive girl who feels alone and like she doesn't fit in. In Issue 5, Sava continued fighting alongside her, but was able to get a message back to a lawman that's been following Maz's crew since the first issue. The High Republic Adventures also released an issue for Free Comic Book Day, taking place in between Phases 1 and 3, giving us a little more information on how the Padawans escaped Starlight Beacon as it crashed. Well, some of them, not all of them. Several of our characters are still trapped as the station plummets towards the ocean, but I'm still hopeful they made it out somehow. Star Wars Issue 34 begins the story of how Luke Skywalker built his green lightsaber, which I am psyched about. He learns a bit about kyber crystals and heads to Christophsis, where he meets a refugee from Jeddah named Greta, who takes him to a kyber researcher named Kuwata, who was first mentioned in the novel Catalyst, so that's a fun connection. Darth Vader Issue 33 was a fast read as it was mostly art this time around. The events of Hidden Empire and the activation of the Fermata Cage have released a strange wave in the Force affecting anyone connected to it. Vader seems like he's unable to control his power, tearing apart the Executor and a shuttle, so Sabe takes him to an uninhabited planet where he can work everything out, but instead he starts to try to force her into committing herself to a darker path again. In issue 34, he gives Sabe a vision of the future through the Force, but instead, she simply sees that Luke and Padme are in his mind, confirming for her that there is still good in him. She refuses to give in to hate of any kind, so Vader launches her into the ocean. Then a ship full of some group of people sees him struggling on the beach and decides to try to take him out, which of course they can't. This whole Force Wave business is kind of weird. I'm struggling with the Vader comics again. But moving on, Dr. Aphra issue 31 was just nice. Aphra has been possessed by the Spark Eternal for a while, so now that she's free, we spent most of the time letting the various characters figure out where they all stood emotionally and romantically, and Sana leaves Aphra alone to figure herself out, which is the right move, but it was still moving and sad. The final pages set up Aphra and Luke for an adventure, and they're a fun team, so I'm ready for the next arc of the series, which begins in Dr. Aphra issue 32. Aphra recruits/kidnaps Luke for a mission to a Jedi temple she caught word of in a message from Shaak Ti to Aayla Secura. It supposedly holds some artifact they wanted to keep out of Sith hands during the Clone Wars. Luke struggles to get them inside as the Force is still out of whack after the activation of the Fermata cage, but eventually they make it, where they are met face to face by both Shaak Ti and Aayla Secura, who are both definitely supposed to be dead. I imagine this is some sort of trick because I don't think they faked their deaths or anything, but we'll have to wait and see next month. Bounty Hunters issue 34 brought the Inferno Squad arc to a close. Iden and the others get the upper hand on the Bounty Hunters and scramble Valence's memories so he'll forget he ever saw the Death Star, but they leave him alive per their instructions. And so Valance also forgets about his mother. I don't know how he became one of the most tragic characters in Star Wars history, but here we are. Some of the Hunters leave in the aftermath, but Tonga decides to help Valance maybe fix his memories, which becomes their next mission. Yoda issue 7 began the final arc of this miniseries. The Grand Jedi Master undertakes a stealth mission where his size is an advantage to learn about a new separatist project codenamed Operation Titan, which winds up being a new batch of giant battle droids subtly named Mega Droids. Yoda winds up facing off against General Grievous before escaping, which was a fun matchup. Sana Starros issue 4 saw more and more of Sana's family getting kidnapped by her Imperial brother. She and Diva Lompop are the only hope left to rescue them and retrieve some old crystal research that I assume would help the Empire with the Death Star. But while they form a plan, Sana's cousin goes into labor, so the 5th and final issue should definitely be interesting. The Lando issue of the Return of the Jedi stories was fine. It showed us a bit of Lando's progression between episodes 5 and 6, which we've also been seeing in the main Star Wars run, but Lando and Chewie play a game of sabacc that ends in a shootout with the Empire, all so they can get a hold of the plans to Jabba's palace and all its secret passages. I wonder if we'll soon learn more about the very convoluted plan to save Han Solo. Darth Vader Black, White, and Red issue 2 was more of the same. The art is pretty cool and interesting, but I'm not really into the stories. I think they track for Vader and his character, but they can also be read as if they're glorifying his use of the dark side to get what he wants. I'm always a little wary of Star Wars stories that simply treat Vader as a badass murder machine. One of the stories is even about how Vader can inspire others to think power is all that's important. I don't really think that's the intent of this series, but it's on my mind a lot when I'm reading it. Hyperspace Stories issue 5 was a fine little story about Asajj Ventress on the hunt for an ancient relic, which wound up being the object that was hidden inside a stuffed animal way back in the first issue. I'm surprised at how invested I am in this little toy, but it's been a fun through line for this series. But that's it for May. My favorite story of the month was probably Screecher's Reach in Star Wars Visions Volume 2. I also wanted to shout out Star Wars Jedi Survivor. I didn't name it as my favorite story of April because the game had just been released, but throughout May I sunk 90 hours into it and was genuinely sad when I ran out of things to do. In June, we're getting 12 new comic issues, including the final 3 pieces of the High Republic adventures, which will wrap up Phase 2 of the publishing initiative. A lighter month, but honestly, I'm okay with that. It was a crazy first 5 months for 2023, and I think we could use a breather before Ahsoka starts. At least I can. But that's it for May. The Canon update will return on July 2nd to cover all those new stories. Until then, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, follow us on TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram, and consider checking out our Patreon page. As always, thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you.